widely used method of enslaving people, victims becoming bonded laborers, with the labor is demanded as a means of repayment for a loan or service which is in terms and conditions have been defined or in which the value of the victim's services as reasonably assessed is not applied towards the liquidation of the debt. The value of the work is greater than the original sums of money borrowed. Forced labor is a situation in which victims are forced to work against their own will, under the threat of violence or some other form of punishment. Their freedom is restricted and a degree of ownership is exerted. Men at the risk of being trafficked for unskilled work, which globally generates 31 billion, according to the International Labour Organization. Forms of forced labor can include domestic servitude, agricultural labor, sweatshop factory, labor, food service and other service industry, and begging. Sex trafficking victims are generally found in dire circumstances and easily trafficked by traffickers, individuals, circumstances and situations. Vulnerable to traffic include homeless individuals, runaway teens, displaced homemakers, refugees and drug addicts. While it may seem like trafficking people are the most vulnerable and powerless minorities in a region, victims are constantly exploited from any ethnic and social background. Traffickers are known as pimps or madams, exploit vulnerability and lack of
in this country.
The short answer would be it's a matter for the Indian courts.
Thank you. But still, I would request you to join the next session. And you can ask this question again from the speakers there.
Yeah.
Now,
Next question.
Yeah, you can proceed to the next session. Yeah. I would request
Mr. Peter Britton and partner Lawrence Graham LLP London. He would be deliberating on their subject, role of corporate governance in strengthening the economy.
Okay, for the avoidance of doubt, this is the session on corporate governance. Anyone who is wanting bribery or human rights, it will either be after this session or next door at the moment. So let me introduce myself. I am a partner at a law firm here in London, Lawrence Graham. I am actually a technology lawyer, and I also advise on large outsourcing projects and other commercial arrangements of that kind. Was asked yesterday to talk about corporate governance, and as I seem to be the last speaker in this session, which sort of has taken on a bit of a human rights flavour, I will endeavour to bring it back into a sort of corporate governance area, but it will have somewhat of an IT technology focus, so I hope that is all right. Can we get some water in here too, please? Companies and countries around the world develop their corporate governance regimes. We can see that there are important, I suppose, areas around IT governance that are also influencing the development of the strategic role of companies in complying with those corporate governance regimes. And countries are developing those regimes at different rates. But there are what are some of the drivers behind IT compliance and technology compliance as part of corporate governance? And the first is the proliferation of legislation that we see around the world in areas such as data protection, privacy, computer misuse legislation, often without very little guidance or very little case law, which in themselves create new challenges for compliance at board level, and they are very much compliance issues. Other regimes, government regimes, I mean Sarbanes-Oxley is very well known, similar legislation here in the UK and across Europe, also has substantial technology IT compliance obligations. The increasing amount of intellectual capital, intellectual property that companies now have and put at risk. I mean, look at the financial services sector, data is now a fundamental part of how those organisations do business. The need to align technology projects with strategic business goals. Thank you very much, that's fantastic, thanks. So the alignment of technology projects. Large organisations are constantly now doing major, large-scale technology projects all around the world and outsourcing large amounts of technology. How those organisations ensure that those projects are aligned with their strategic vision is obviously important. And the increasing trends towards information security and the threats to information security. We've seen, probably all seen in the news, all of the incidences of hacking, of people's data being stolen and so on. They, with their threats to corporate reputation, to shareholder value and so on, all also must be brought within this whole spectrum of corporate governance. So ultimately it's all very much about risk management, and the best companies have always addressed strategic risk and corporate governance from the boardroom. So the role of IT governance is very closely linked to all aspects of corporate governance, since in virtually all organisations the IT systems support all of the processes and procedures that are carried out. The ability to exercise appropriate control over an IT system is fundamentally related to the ability of an organisation to make any statement to the compliance of any of its other governance procedures and policies. It's often the case that the inability to access stored data in an appropriate manner precludes an organisation from discharging its corporate governance duties effectively. So credible compliance requires credible IT governance strategies and responses. The prominent role of IT in creating business value has accelerated the establishment of this concept of IT governance as a high priority for boards and executive management. But in response, IT governance practices need to focus on ensuring that the expectations of IT are met and that IT risks are mitigated. An effective IT governance program will help organisations understand the issues and the risks surrounding the strategic importance of IT, ensure that IT can sustain operations, and help companies to use their IT for competitive advantage. So I suppose in short, my argument along in bringing the IT compliance processes within corporate governance processes is that they can also give companies and therefore economies, to bring it back to the topic of this session, benefit, economic advantage and competitive advantage as well. So risk management is obviously a critical component of corporate governance. Risk management helps organisations recognise the wide spectrum of risks that they are exposed to. It aims to help them prioritise risks based on their potential impact, put mitigation plans in place and monitor them so they don't become hurdles in achieving corporate objectives. Information technology is a key support function in any business, and regulation requires the board and the management to report key risks and their assessment of how those risks are being managed. The Chief Information Officer, for example, the CIO, needs to play a significant role in supporting boards, audit committees and management in, I suppose generally, in understanding and implementing good governance over IT. Traditionally, it used to be security and disaster recovery were those risk factors that boards were concerned about. But today, when companies look at IT risk management, they'll be looking at factors such as global sourcing, regulatory compliance, as I've mentioned, privacy, use of personal devices by staff, social networking, trans-border data flow, export control, financial disclosure, business continuity, the ability to carry on business when something disastrous happens, fraud detection, protection of intellectual property and shortage of skilled resources. And that list, it's almost an endless list and keeps growing. I think a few years ago, none of us would have thought about corporate governance in the context of how employees use mobile devices and so on, and how they're using computer networks. But that today is a major challenge for all businesses and for corporate governance. And the sources proliferating risk are increasing as well. I mean, natural disasters such as fires, floods, earthquakes and cyclones have always been a risk for technology. And to that list of more natural calamities can be added an ever-expanding range of man-made risks such as IT viruses, worms, Trojan horses, phishing, spyware, identity theft. All of the risks that we hear about, we read about in the newspapers, all mean that they all lead to our data being ultimately at risk, and from a corporate perspective, their reputation being at risk. So the IT risk management job is becoming more difficult every day. And in addition to that, globalization, new technology, and the attrition rates of staff in this area complicate the task of managing these IT risks. So what is IT risk management? Simply put, it's the identification, assessment, and mitigation of risks related to information technology. The growing importance of IT for successful execution of business goals calls for an effective IT risk management program. And corporate reliance on IT raises the stakes in terms of the importance of maintaining 25...
On the horizon of the world, many complex issues have arisen out of the administration of human rights. Human rights starts with the element of empowerment or with the right to know your right. Human rights, as they are now commonly understood, emerged from the creation of the United Nations. In the aftermath of World War II, governments committed themselves to establish United Nations with the primary goal of promoting international peace and prevent conflict. Human rights are held to be a key to achieving these aims. Preamble of the Charter of the United Nations assert that the main object of the organization are, among other things, to save succeeding generations from the score of the war, reforms facing the fundamental rights, human rights, and in the dignity and the worth of the human person, in equal rights, men and women, and nation large and small. Before I proceed, let me explain that I am a practicing advocate of India and a resident of Jammu and Kashmir state once again, and as such have a personal experience and closely watched and understood the true meaning of human rights and terrorism since 1947, how it works, reacts, its implications, tyranny and plight of the affected person. There were hundreds of asylum from occupied Pakistan, Kashmir during 1947, time of division of the country into India and Pakistan, and thereafter 1965, 1971 war, at the time of war with India and Pakistan, and lately in 1990, a mass migration of minorities community to the tune of 300,000 people from Kashmir. We are also witnessing the attack of terrorism in a thickly populated area, killing innocent people, scatter their flesh and blood on the roads, committed rapes in a barbarian manner. It affects the great trauma, destroyed property, burned houses, killing selected persons in buses, trains, and destroyed peace and tranquility. Thus, resulting uncertainty all around, violation of human rights and terrorism at the hands of the terrorism is the order of the day. Thousands have been dying within span of 2 decades.
Service provider needs to be absolutely clear on what it is that's being done under this arrangement. So all of these risk mitigation strategies, all of these corporate governance strategies, as I've been talking about, need to also be extended to those strategic service providers. So there is a need to ensure that adequate IT risk mitigation measures and controls are adopted by those third parties, and those controls also need to be tested from time to time. The next area I want to look at of risk in this area is performance measurement. And in this area, it's somewhat specific to the use of IT within businesses, but it really revolves around the difficulty that most companies have in actually measuring the performance of their IT services. And so where you have, for example, an outsourcing arrangement, quite